The New Economy in Northern Ireland, Part 2, New Narratives, with Robb, Mary McManus, Bridget Meehan and Tiziana O'Hara, hosted by me, Maurice McCartney. In the first episode in this series, we looked at the development of the grassroots democratic economic model known as community wealth building and asked if it could provide the basis for a new, sustainable, equitable economy in Northern Ireland. But as the COVID-19 pandemic begins to lift, are we in danger of missing an opportunity?
The narrative is, of course you must want to be out there consuming all the time. Of course that's what, that's why you go to work, so that you've got money to have this life of leisure, at the weekends and to consume. And this is not trying to knock people that want to go and buy themselves something nice, or go around the shops and have a look at what's there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's this sense that we haven't been able to love for the past year or so because we haven't been able to get out and do all this consumption like the way we normally have.
I suppose it's just like we're so much more than consumers, but it feels a bit like, what you're saying, Bridget, that pull to consume is so, that's the thing that defines us as like such a core part of our identity.
I wonder if this is the, because the moment of crisis is a moment of opportunity to get people to think differently.
Yeah. But
are we in danger of letting it slip by and people all rushing back out and just queuing up outside Primark and whatnot? And
that's the thing that's crossing my mind. That last year there was all this talk about, God, isn't it wonderful the way we've all just pulled together and there's this community spirit, and we don't need consumerism, or we don't need all these material things. We've got community, we've got each other. We're going to get through this terrible time. And there was this optimism, even though it was kind of a very scary thing that was happening, something that in our lifetimes we've never seen. And there seemed to be a sense then that from that and people taking agency and going back into their communities and maybe reconnecting with people or connecting with them for the first time and seeing, God, we actually do have communities here and we can do things at the grassroots level. But that has slowly been eroded. You don't hear that kind of talk anymore. You don't hear people, that kind of optimism that was there a year ago, and the way people were engaging with their own communities and maybe saying they wanted to see different things. It's just, that seems to have disappeared. And now it's like, of course we want to consume. Of course we want things to go back to normal. Of course we want to be stuck in offices again, kind of thing. Sorry, Tiziana.
No, sorry. I don't buy the idea of we are in a crisis, we have an opportunity to make a social change. I think that when you needed to really change things, you needed to do deeper. It's a systemic change. It's that kind of change. This is why all that enthusiasm didn't mature to nothing, didn't really become the change that we wanted to see, because it was superficial. It was an emergency. I think when we make a decision in emergency, it's for survival. And that doesn't last. We cannot be in that mode all the time, in survival mode. We needed to find a way back to normal, that it's a normal different of what was before. And in order to do that, I think that we needed to dig deeper and systemically change what we are. So in some sort of way, if the crisis was a moment of reflection, now the reflection needs to be, what do we want to be, really? Still consumers, still, enjoy Primark, or enjoy the common ownership of a farm where we can actually volunteer some time and co-produce a courgette. I think
that.
it
That's
is
a great tagline. Let's go produce a courgette.
Well, I love courgettes. I remember the first time I came to Northern Ireland, I bought 3 courgettes. It cost me £9. So it
my
was only
God.
one shop in Belfast that could sell it. So now I'm glad that we can have more variety, more biodiversity, but not because I want to be consuming that, but because it makes me happy that there are more things out there and it can be produced by my allotment garden, and next door to me in the waterworks. So in some sort of way, that's the. So going back, is that crisis was enough? The crisis? No, but we needed to ask different questions now, I think, and the question are about our identity as citizens, maybe. I don't know.
But how do we get people to dig deeper, enough to take action?
There's a 3-part series on Radio 4 at the minute called Dare to Repair, which is the story of how we've got in such a mess with all our shit. And next week's about repair cafes. But the first part I thought was really interesting because it was like I was thinking about how do I change a bit of my story at repair cafes. So one of the things that happens, I think I said this before, quite often is that when people arrive, they'll say, "Isn't it terrible? We just don't have the skills anymore." And we talk about making the skills visible because the skills are there, they're just not visible. But actually, listening to that program, this part of it's interesting what people choose, what we all collectively choose to say and focus on, which is there's no skills for repair. And that was designed in because of planned obsolescence. That was designed into goods so that repair skills weren't needed on the high street anymore. So that, so it was just really interesting to me that that's the story that's reproduced, that the skills aren't there, when actually what happened was the manufacturers changed their business model so that they would produce stuff with less durable components made from plastic. And then they found out that when they broke, well, they could make cheaper models, and then instead of fixing them, you would just go and buy new ones. So the story is actually, well, manufacturers planned in obsolescence. That's what the story is, not that there are no repair skills. Because there are no repair skills stuff makes it sound like we made some kind of conscious choice. And they made a conscious choice, and that affected the decisions that we made, but we didn't have all the information that manufacturers made sure that those skills weren't needed.
So I wonder, is that part of it then, that to revive those skills is one part of it, but the other part of it is to change the story that people tell each other and that we tell each other. And in other words, if we're going to build a new economy based on different foundation, then we need storytellers as well. We're going to need people
new narratives,
yeah.
Because it struck me when you were talking about that, Lee, that was so spot on. And it was like, when we talk about the mutual bank and the narrative that goes out there is that people don't want branches anymore. They're not coming into these branches. They don't need them. Everybody's online. Everybody wants their banking app on their mobile, and but that's not actually quite the truth. The banks, it's the banks that have said, actually, it's costing us too much money to put these branches here. So we would rather be able to cut those costs, glean that as profits, and we'll just tell people that, look, you've got everything online. Who wants to come into a branch anyway? This is so not what people want from banking services. Yes, you want online. Yes, you want your app. You want to be able to do that. But you also want to be able to talk to somebody face to face when maybe there's something going on in your life where you actually need some help, or you've run into financial problems. So the need for branches is still there. They tell us we don't want money. You don't want to take out money. You want to pay for everything electronically. Not really. Sometimes, I'll want cash, but it's how they're framing it, and they have the sort of the media. I mean, when I say media, I'm talking about the mainstream media, who kind of aren't very creative in a lot of ways. I can be very critical of them, and I don't want to disrespect anybody, but they just go along with the main narratives that they're told. They're not going to resist that. So they're not going to say, they're not going to tell a story where there's bank branches have closed, for example, and oh God, people really need these. Why are the banks doing that? They'll just go along with that narrative that the banks are giving them. They'll go along with the narrative too that there are no skills for repair. Any of these narratives that are being pushed out there to basically drive profit and consumerism. That's.
But then, and the narratives of like us, for example, where we're saying actually we need something different, or Lee, and I think that's interesting what you said there about, when we're talking about, this time last year there was the optimism and but it seems to have gone. And Tiziana, you said it not being sustained. And then you're saying, Lee, well, actually, we don't know, just because it's not visible, we don't know, has the narrative or story shifted for people? Like say for people who never thought they were going to end up on universal credit, but they have because of this pandemic. And they may have judged people who were on that before or not understood the kind of circumstances that can get you into a position where that's where you end up. And, for the people like the artists maybe always had a different narrative, or the musicians, the creative people, or the self-employed people who, because there's so many winners with COVID and so many losers, when I say winners, I mean, that sounds awful, but, like as in people who've been able to work at home and not spend much, and their savings have increased greatly, to the point where people, might be spending £1,500 on a puppy. Well, some people are going to the food banks, and that's literally what's happening. But I wonder for how many people has the narrative shifted, and are we not seeing it? And like I can't remember which of us said there that suddenly something changes. Is there this slow build up under the surface? But they're not making it, we're going to have more news stories about people queuing outside of Primark rather. I feel like we're advertising that shop actually, just by mentioning it. And that's despite the very bad publicity some of these shops have for where their produce comes from and the conditions that the people are suffering to make the cheap clothes that we can have. But yeah, I'd love to know, has something shifted that we're not aware of for many people? But I don't feel it's being really reflected so much in the narrative that the media is feeding us.
As somebody said, in the mainstream media, at any rate. So I wonder, is there a case for, trying to, if you're trying to build an alternative economy, you need to build an alternative media as well, like a new media. And perhaps this is it, some of the skills that we learned while having to work from home, to do with, video conferencing and putting little videos together and things like that. Maybe that is also the beginning of something, a shift in, if there's maybe there's a will and an appetite there, and people are now just getting used to the tools and beginning to think, oh, we can actually do this for ourselves again. That sort of do-it-yourself spirit. I don't know. Is that?
Well, it makes me think about, so that I know you shared that Revisit in Britain piece that Hazel Sheffield had done on positive Carrickfergus recently, and I met Hazel at Sturdy Action Festival, and Hazel's been doing that work for quite a long time, but during the pandemic, as far as I'm aware, she developed a relationship with Power to Change, which is a big funder that was set up by the lottery through an endowment that funds community businesses. So I think that's really interesting that they have seen that's part of that work, is about telling those stories, and that relationship with the funder, with somebody who has the journalistic credibility and skills that Hazel has. So that, and there's Novara and other kind of alternative byline times and that, you know, that stuff was already in train before the pandemic. But the thing but there's an issue around scale, I think, as well, but I'm just curious about not always doing stuff on a mass scale, and actually, you know, for me, my work is to change that narrative in Carrick. That doesn't have to be, you know, all online. It can be through relationships and through, you know, with other human beings, like that are face to face as well. Because to some extent, it's in dialogue that you're actually able to challenge the dominant narratives, not by broadcasting, because there's so many competing narratives broadcasting.
If you go back to the mainstream media and the messages they give, you know, I can't actually do this to my brain every day. But if you listen to the news all day long, like, you know, all the different times that the news is on, like TV, radio, it's even more intense. But you are getting the exact same information. By the end of the day, you could almost repeat the whole the news broadcast, because it's the same one that they've had all morning, since the morning, that they've repeated 100 times that day.
But perhaps we need more than a narrative change. Perhaps we need institutional change.
For me, all this is very important, and I do understand how the narratives needs to change. I do understand how we can change it through a kind of very interpersonal kind of exchange, and that can be very efficient. But there is also something deeper, in my opinion, again, that needs to be changed, and is the way the bigger kind of institution needs to relate to the smaller kind of stuff. Because I always felt that through all the cooperatives that we have supported and work with across Northern Ireland, there always been a kind of glass ceiling that they never been able to break through, and that it's again because there is this kind of conversation that doesn't go through neither the funders, Lee, because the power to change, as you know, is in England, but it doesn't come here.
Yeah.
And the National Lottery in Northern Ireland is a completely different animal than the National Lottery in other regions of the UK. So it seems that even that kind of a dialogue is so fragmented that there is some kind of institutional rigidity through which, and the glass ceiling analogy, you know, it's like women kind of struggle. You go and then you have the glass ceiling. So there are new business, new initiatives, something community-led, and then you have the glass ceiling. And the glass ceiling is made of government, other private business, other within the same kind of ecosystem business. So it's really fundamental, and I find that the frustrating part. Yes, you can change the mind of one individual, but to me is how can we change the mind of the full department of government? How can we change the mind of a full funder? Why they cannot see that there are different things, and why we don't change the mind of the media? Yes, we can create alternative to that, but at the end of the day, we also need to tackle, at least you know, intellectually, how do we tackle the resistance that they have towards anything new? or different?
No, I mean, I agree with you, and I kind of, from my own experience, have seen things like, say, from the statutory or the institutional point of view, you've got people who actually are very happy with the status quo. They want things to stay where they are because it works for them. You know, they're not the people that are usually the recipients of any of the public money that has to go on the ground. And they're looking at their careers, and I'm talking generally here, I'm not talking about individuals. And I know that within those systems, there are good people who want to do something better and different. But generally, those systems are there and they maintain the status quo because the status quo is okay. And then what you've got are the people who engage with them from, say, the community and voluntary sector, who are willing to work within that status quo. They are willing to do what, you know, okay, what are you looking for? What do you want to spend the money on this year? Okay, we'll you know, put in applications for programs that fit what you're looking for. So it's almost like a symbiosis between the two. You've got the institutions and the funders who are very happy with the status quo. You've got the recipients of that money within the community and voluntary sector, again, speaking generally, who are willing to work within that status quo as long as they can get the money. And then if you come in, if somebody comes in left field and is a challenger to that, though, that person has to be sort of crushed and killed, because they're going to upset the whole apple cart for everybody. They're not only are they going to maybe upset the status quo and disrupt that, but they are also going to be competition for the people who should be just getting this money. You know, it should be just a steady stream of this money coming to them. So that's, to me, you've got everybody in cahoots to keep the system in place. And it's very hard then, you know, people even talk about why do we not make inroads into these systems, because they're so huge and they are very powerful and they have a lot of resources, far more resources than the likes of us or people trying to do alternative things. So it's very, very difficult to start breaking them. It's not impossible. In fact, if I thought it was impossible, I couldn't get up in the morning. But
Yeah.
I know it's possible, but it's just very hard. And you know, but you have to realize that you will be worked against, Tiziana. There will be people actively working against you, because for you to exist is a threat to them. Maybe not right now, but further down the line. What if you start to do things and get results that they can't get, and then the funders decide, oh, right, we're going to start paying this, you know, we're going to start putting more money into this kind of thing instead of what we've always done. So you're a threat. So you do have to be crushed. You do have to be stopped. That might sound a bit conspiratorial, but I've seen that for myself, and I've also, you know, personally, but I've also seen evidence of it happening to others as well.
Well, I guess that it is possible, and I suppose, you know, Mary, you've talked about a couple of examples before, and you know, in the Imagine Festival, for example, about, you know, Preston, Cleveland, and North Ayrshire, and other places where somehow there has been a breakthrough in thinking. You know, people are starting to think differently and say, oh, this is a better way to do things, and we're going to put some resources into it. Maybe you want to reflect on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, and also just to reflect on the fact that, you know, from Tiziana and Bridget outlining how difficult it is, but yet here we are still, as Bridget said, you think it's possible. And even though it's hard, there are lots of people, including ourselves, who think it's possible and want to work towards that. And I think I definitely think COVID has resulted, I think the number of people feeling that way was growing because the inequality has been so bad and growing. And also the climate crisis has been bringing about change as well. So, I mean, that gives me hope. I love the fact that despite it being so hard, there are many of us that think, yeah, no, it's possible. We're going to do it. You know, it's a great thing of the human spirit, a great sign, or, you know, a great reflection of how the human spirit is. But yes, in Cleveland, and in Cleveland influenced Preston with community wealth building, where they Cleveland looked at the situation in their city, and in a very rundown area, they realized that they had institutions with lots of money, public money. So the idea is that where there's been deindustrialization, the public sector then becomes, or the not-for-profit sector becomes, the main driver of economic activity in an area. So the hospital and the university started looking at their procurement, and actually there was, like, funding really was a very important part of the Cleveland story, and what's referred to as patient capital was invested in worker owner cooperatives, and the first being a laundry that would serve the needs of the hospital. So this hospital had been existing there, but yet the people around it, living in the areas, were living in poverty. But so the idea, which some people then put together, was to fund this worker owner cooperative that would give people not just a job, but also an asset, to help them, not return to poverty. So it took a long time, like it took years before that laundrette became profitable, and it is now profitable, and it outbid a big private company to get a contract for the hospital, a bigger contract. And also there's now two other worker owner cooperatives, like one growing food and another doing solar panels, an energy company. So that influenced Preston. And in Preston, and the model's called community wealth building. And then in Preston took this up in 2013. Round about the same time, Belfast also looked at this. So it's like sometimes there are policymakers who are looking at outside and thinking, this is interesting, maybe this could work here. So Preston looked at this, but they ran with it. Belfast didn't. Belfast looked at this. It looked like a good idea where they would harness the power of public procurement to support local small, medium enterprises, cooperatives. But Preston ran with the idea and achieved really good results. And yes, there's people thinking differently there. And now people have been in other places have been influenced by Preston. And I mean, if you go on the Centre for Local Economic Strategies website from Manchester and look at the map, their community wealth building map, you'll see lots of little pinpoints across Scotland, England, and Wales. You will not see any on this island yet, but you have people there who believe that this is an answer to not a silver bullet. It's part of an answer to dealing with inequality and dealing with poverty. I mean, I recently heard two politicians say at a meeting that there's no silver bullet for dealing with poverty, right? Which I felt was such a way of saying, we're not going to do anything about this. Do you know what I mean? So the people, the people in Preston or North Ayrshire who practice this, or in Hackney in London, or, they're not saying this is impossible. They're saying, actually, we believe it is possible to tackle this, and we're going to try this. What community wealth building is a systemic approach to changing the economy. So they're thinking it's doable, and it's been proved it's doable. It needs adapted for each place, but we have places that have paved the way to show to the nervous policymakers, that actually this makes sense. It's doable, it's practical. So let's do it.
Many thanks to Mary McManus, Tiziana O'Hara, Bridget Meehan and Robb. For further information, visit thecombination.org.uk or follow us on Twitter @combination_NI.